Hello, everyone. I'm so excited for you guys to be here and meet my friend Shay. So, Shay's going to tell us a little bit about her story. We're really close friends, and we're going to kind of tell you about our very different faith views and how we're able to remain friends, even though we see the world
A little
a
differently.
little differently. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Shay Brackney. Terry and I have been friends for about a decade.
Hmm.
We were both members of the LDS Church and friends at that time. And about 2014, 15, I started with my own faith transition. Um, Came to some conclusions that led me out of the church. And um, like it is for for most people I know who have gone through a faith transition that was explosive in my life. It shook every foundation that I had and every truth that I thought I held dear, and I had to revisit or visit each of those um, fundamental, things that I thought were fundamentally true. And where I landed was after a few years, I landed in Christianity, and I wanted to, I guess, share a little bit about
Yeah, go
how
for
I
it.
got there. So I was an adult convert to the LDS Church. I had started as a kid in predominantly raised Lutheran, and I had gone away from the church when I was probably about 12 or 13, and um, went several years without any religion. And then my father passed away when I was about 24, and it made me start searching. And so I remembered um, my foundation, what I had been taught when I was a kid. So I was looking really, really hard for the answers to the world, answers to, does God exist and all those things. And I went to many, many churches, and I just didn't feel comfortable in any of them. But I had a girlfriend who was a practicing Mormon, and I loved what I saw in her family and the dynamics of, they had a family night, they, studied scriptures together, they prayed together. All of those things were what I was looking for. And I had a baby at the time, my first child. And so I was, that was what I wanted to model in my home. And so it brought me to investigate the church, and I eventually joined. But joining as an adult, when I went through, so it was about 15 years before I hit my faith transition. And when I left and the dust finally settled, I had to go back to decide what did I find to be comforting and true for me.
Yeah.
And that took me again back to my roots, but in a much simpler way. I went to scripture, and I find that for me, when I started looking at scriptures, it wasn't the answers, it imparted wisdom. It
Mhm.
imparted a way for me to find wisdom for myself. And so that was kind of where I started, just the mustard seed everyone talks about, but that little bit of feeling like there is something bigger than myself, and that there is a purpose for me and for my life and for my family. And so I started investigating that a bit. And today I identify fully as a Christian, and I'm I'm back into. I started missing community after a year or two, so I went to a non-denominational church,
Hmm.
and it's a little different for me now than it was when I was young, and even when especially when I was in practicing Mormon, I don't take things at face value. I take them, I try them on, I see where they fit in my life, and I let them, I let that be what guides. I am thinking and feeling, and I make decisions based on where I am
Hmm.
and what I'm hearing, not just taking it at face value anymore, because
Right.
that was part of, for me, where I started to lose myself over years ago. So anyways, that's where I am today, and how I got here.
I love it. There have actually been a lot of people who have asked me where I am because I haven't actually stated that in any of my videos yet. So you all know my story, and if you don't, you can go watch my video. There's like a 20-minute video on my entire story. I guess the condensed version. But right now, I'm definitely agnostic, and I kind of swing between agnostic theist to agnostic atheist. So it kind of depends on the day and the situation, and really kind of what I'm studying. Really, I want to believe in a God, but sometimes I have instances where it's difficult for me to wrap my head around what that would look like, and make logical sense of it. And so, yeah, so we have a Christian, and often sometimes I can be very atheist. So,
Hmm.
yeah, so we have, it's been very, very interesting. We're going to kind of talk about our relationship because on the Instagram account that I have, there have been several different conversations about like keeping friendships with people that think differently than you, whether they are still in the LDS faith or they have become Christian, Jewish. There have been a few who've become Muslim or Buddhist. People have several different journeys when they leave the LDS faith. And so we're going to talk about remaining friends with people, how you do that, when you have very different viewpoints.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
So,
So I'm trying to think about where do we start. So,
so I think some of it is probably, about the time that um, you were starting to make your transition and we had our first conversations.
mhm,
I mean, I look to when I first made my transition and where I was at that time. I went through all sorts of different emotions. Some of it was anger, some of it was sadness, deep sadness and fear of the unknown.
mhm,
And so conversations I was having then very different than the conversations that I am able to have now
mhm.
with people who are standing in a different place than I am. So
Right.
when I first started my transition, I had a lot of anger well up in me,
Me too.
right? And
Yeah.
so when somebody who was still practicing would try to have a conversation with me, I just snippy snap. I mean, I was so
Right.
angry and so bitter, and then feeling like either so I was being really judgeful. They either didn't have a clue, they
Mhm.
just didn't get it, or they didn't see me.
Right.
And so I was defensive about that. And when you started your transition, I was already a few years into mine, so some of that had subsided, and I was able to start to look at a bigger picture that, all right, why why did I become a member of the church in the first place?
Mhm.
So at that point, when I made that decision, it fit for me.
Right.
So I had to be respectful of people who were still members of the church, that it fit for them
Right.
presently, and that's okay. That's their reality. That's what their belief system is.
Mhm.
And who am I? I think everybody is entitled to their story,
Right.
right? Everybody has a story. And
Right.
so who am I to say that their story isn't valid,
Right.
because it isn't my story,
Right.
right? And so when you came to me and when we first started talking about your transition, and you were kind of in the place that
Oh,
I
I
had
was in the
been,
angry place.
yeah,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, in the did you know this and did you know that and did you know this and this history and that history and this and by the way this is how this relates and I never knew this. Yeah,
And
I
even
was
for
definitely
Yeah,
yeah.
very much. And even for me, who had already been 2 years into my transition or so, I was like, wow, I'm overwhelmed
I
because,
remember that dinner like I was just like "Bleh."
right?
Yeah.
It's like,
It all just came out. You're sitting there like cutting your steak and I'm just like history, history, history. Yes.
but even then, and for some of that, it shook a little bit of foundation for me again. It brought
Right.
up some new feelings for me. But um, there was, my mom was a really wise woman, and she always said, "You have two ears, one mouth, use accordingly." And
Mhm.
so I was learning to practice listening, like active listening, to not only what someone was saying, but what was behind what they were saying. Like,
Right.
where's their heart, and what are they? What is the emotion behind what they're saying?
Mhm.
And so when you were in that place and I had sort of made, come through the hard part of that place,
Mhm.
I could listen and be like, okay,
Yeah.
I know she's in the hard place right now.
I was in a real hard place.
Really hard
So I
place.
was only a month out.
Yeah.
I think it was like a month, maybe 6 weeks out.
And so everything
Oh,
was new, and every piece of information you were getting was new
yes.
and big and explosive.
Oh, I was like going down the rabbit hole. Like, and I think really what I was in that place of, I was trying to grasp for straws, looking for something to hang on to,
Hmm.
and there was nothing. Like everything I grabbed onto broke. And so it was
Free fall.
so scary. And I think that's where the anger comes in, because the anger feels, I think the anger feels more powerful than the fear, if that makes sense. And so anger is a little bit easier to grab onto than fear. Um, but
It's
yeah,
easier to name for sure,
for sure.
right?
Yeah.
I'm just mad. I'm just
Oh my
angry,
gosh,
right?
so bad.
Instead of
Yeah.
I'm really sad or I'm really fearful or I'm really hurt or
Yeah.
any of those. Those
I
are
feel
so
betrayed, or any of those things. Just
comes a little later. It's just anger. And so, so, but that started a bridge to us being able to talk about the similarities, right?
mhm.
So yes, we're both making a faith transition. I'm in this place and you're in that place. And, through the years now, we of course had those things in
Yeah.
similarity, but like you said, we've come to different conclusions as to where we are today.
Right.
And so one of the things that I love about you and about my friendship with you is that you ask genuine questions. Like so it opens up a safe place because when you ask me a question about how I see something and then you just listen, you just pause and it's sincere and I can
Mhm.
feel that it's sincere. So I feel really safe saying,
I'm so glad.
yeah, but so I feel safe saying, even when we've had discussions about like how things look in the Christian world, I
Mhm.
feel very safe being able to say, knowing exactly where you're at. Well, hey, this is the scripture, and this is how I read this,
Right.
and I am not afraid of how that's going to land
Right.
because I think that you we care more about our friendship than about proving our positions.
Absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
conversational.
Right.
And when you're sharing where you are or how you see something, I learn so much
Mhm.
about just an option of seeing something that wouldn't occur to me because I live, like everybody does to an extent. I live in the box of my world.
Absolutely. We all do. I think we were just talking right before we started recording about how there's as many different stories and as many different perspectives as there are people. It's like
Yeah.
a fingerprint. There is no other person on the planet that sees life or things the way I do, and there's no one that sees it the way you do, and they're all valid.
And that's, I think, the most important part
Yeah.
is giving validity to whether you believe or agree
Right.
that it's still valid what somebody feels and thinks,
Right.
that is their reality and their world, and that is absolutely valid.
Yes.
And it's not for me to tell them that, to aggressively come at someone that they're wrong because who am I? That is their belief.
Absolutely. And I'm like thinking about the times when either I've gone after somebody
Hmm.
aggressively or they've come after me aggressively. No one ever changes. No one ever changes their mind in that environment.
Right.
No one wakes up and says, you know what, you yelling at me really makes me see your point of view. I can see where you're coming from. You're absolutely right.
I'm totally on board now.
Yeah, no, that just leaves with everybody not liking each other, not wanting to talk to each
And
other
really
ever
digging in
again.
even harder to
Yes,
whatever their opinion was.
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So funny how that happens.
it doesn't leave
Yeah.
room. So and so in our friendship, that's how it works. Is that I think we're really respectful of the fact that we have different opinions and we've landed in different places at this time, and that that's okay.
Mhm.
For other people who maintain friendships with, for instance, I mean, I still have a lot of friends who are in the church who are active members and dear friends, and it has taken a long time for that same sense of safety to
Yes.
come about.
Yes.
And so in the beginning, when I left the church, I was extremely um, secretive about it, really. I mean, so secretive my husband didn't know I had left the church. I just was
I forgot
lazy.
about
Yeah, I
that.
was just lazy and we weren't going to church anymore, and so
You're like, we're just keeping that secret
we're
to
just going to be
myself.
really quiet about that. and
Yeah.
and so for me it was right after the 2015 policy that I was done. I sat down on the couch with my husband and was like, I'm out. And so that is and I had been out in my heart,
Mhm.
like officially out, since early 14.
Okay.
And my transition started in as early as 2009.
Oh, wow.
I was starting to grapple with,
So right about the time I'm meeting you.
right.
Okay.
I was grappling with just some things that weren't hitting me right anymore. Lots of long to do lists, and I was super overwhelmed. And
Right.
so I was just kind of starting to take breaks.
Mhm.
I'd take a Sunday off, or I'd take, or I just kind of halfway do one of my many callings. And I did that for a number of years. But
Mhm.
in 14, in my heart, I was out, and I didn't tell anybody. And that includes, all of and up to my closest friend.
Right.
And I had made the decision. So after I had the conversation with my husband and made the absolute decision that I was leaving, there was about 18 months before I ventured into trying a non-denominational church. And in that 18 months, so this is not the way I recommend this be done.
There's so many things in my journey. I'm like,
Right?
don't
You're
do it
like,
that way.
don't do it like that. So I seriously kept it pretty much secret, and um, even from my closest friend.
Mhm.
And so when I made the decision to go to another church, I knew I was gonna have to come clean. I mean, I was totally inauthentic in my friendship. I mean, I was taking pains to not have any conversations about religion, church, anything.
Mhm.
And so, and that was weighing on me very heavily.
Right, because when you're not being authentic, like it just, yeah. Even though we told our family that first year, and and I mean we were pretty open about, we went to our bishop. We told him like we can't. I mean, I needed to be released from my calling. My husband needed to be released from his. But still, like silent, silent on social media, silent with friends. Like, and I almost went into recluse mode. You were one of the few people I talked to during that time because I just.
Well, your phone call to me was, so I understand you might have left the church. Can we have dinner?
Yes.
Sure, we can have dinner.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure where that was going.
You're like, all right. So, but yeah, you hide a little bit. I think because you're afraid of what being authentic means. What is the price of that?
Right.
But then it starts to weigh on you when you're not authentic.
It was changing every conversation I was having
Yes.
because I was terrified that we somehow wade into, that conversation. And it was, and I was only able to keep it secret because she and I were in different wards. And
Right.
so, when you're in different wards, you just don't know
Mm-mm.
what's going on. And
Mm-mm.
um, so when I was terrified. I was
Yeah.
absolutely terrified. The most important relationship I had, more a sister than a friend, I was going to lose that. And I had lost so much already that
Yeah.
that was just, that was going to be the straw.
Yeah.
I was literally, I mean, I can feel the emotion now.
Yeah.
I was going to lose it all.
And I think we all have those
Oh,
relationships like that you're just like,
can't
yeah.
lose it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how, but I can't lose it. And the night that I went over to share what was going on with her, I mean, first of all, she was amazing. And it was so hard for me to even verbalize. I mean, I was just sobbing. I couldn't even verbalize, but I
Mm-hmm.
just finally said, I'm leaving the church. And she embraced me, and, and had experience with her in her uh, personal life of some people that were
Mm-hmm.
close to her having left previously. So that I think helped. And I, being so into myself, had completely forgotten like she might have any
Right.
ability to be sympathetic or empathetic at all with what was going on with me. But that was the first and really hard conversation. And then we had several conversations right after that, but I was still sorting out what I was thinking and feeling and believing.
That's so hard because they often ask you, like, what do you think now? What do you
Right.
believe now? And you're like, oh, I don't know. Even still, I'm like, I'm agnostic, which by definition means I don't know.
Right. Couldn't tell you.
I don't know what I think and believe. I'm like, right now, I think this, but I am very aware that I'm not certain about anything. Like, there's very, very little that I'm certain about. So,
Right.
which is a scary position for some people.
It's a really scary position
Yeah.
for some people. And, and even though I will absolutely say and believe wholeheartedly, I'm absolutely Christian. I believe in Jesus Christ, and I those are my, that's my fundamental belief. I still will say, and I have faith and hope that
Hmm.
that what I believe is true, because the reality is none of us know. And so I hold that hope and faith,
Hmm.
but it allows me that there's like freedom in not absolutely anchoring myself, diving in, that I know with an absolute shadow of a doubt
Right.
that it helps me to it for me, it helps me continue to grow,
Right.
that I'm still open to learning and hearing and having discussions that are not,
Absolutely.
in line with what I think I, believe. So even though you absolutely profess agnosticism, that you don't know, I I hope I know, but I leave room for the fact that I don't know, for
Which might be
for
why it kind
sure.
of works for us because me, I'm like, I don't, you could be right. I don't know. And you're like,
Hope I'm
I
right.
hope I'm right, but I don't
I
know.
don't know till I
Yeah.
till I cross that threshold of death. I'm not gonna have the definitive answer, and so
Right.
so I don't know, and that is, helped even in my relationship with my dearest friends, is that I can leave room, that I don't hold this big stick of I have all the answers and
Hmm.
you're wrong.
Hmm.
So it lets me have compassion
Hmm.
for another, for someone else's belief, even though
Absolutely.
they don't sit right for me,
Right.
but it sits right for them.
Right. I think one of the things I like about that place of uncertainty is that you can hear other people's ideas and they don't feel as threatening.
Right.
So I can listen to one of my Muslim friends tell
Mhm.
me how they view the world, and I can sit and listen and allow those teachings to kind of, I guess, sit and ponder in my head. But I can do the same with Christian teachings. And I'm even kind of getting to the point where I can kind of reconsider, some of the teachings I grew up with and like sort through and pick out like what I like and what I absolutely do not want. Um,
Mhm.
and so there's a lot of that. There's also something that I've learned with some of my LDS friends still is that there's a difference, for me at least, whenever I'm talking with someone who's Christian or talking with someone who's Muslim or Jewish or atheist, because there's some hardcore atheists that believe they know atheism. I have a hard time with that too.
Mhm.
Um, but for me, it can get a little tricky talking with people who are still in the church simply because there is so much trauma for me, particularly that I mean, even walking into a church building for me is traumatic,
Yeah.
and some of the language that things are couched in is very traumatic, and so I find myself sometimes really struggling with empathy because the trauma gets triggered so often.
Right.
Um, so let's kind of explore for a minute. What do you do when the person you're talking with, like just the language they use, or the things they're talking about, or even the places they're asking you to visit? Like if they ask
Right.
you to come for a baptism, or they ask you to come for a missionary farewell, or
Right.
a baby blessing, or a temple wedding, how do you access empathy while you're experiencing trauma? How does that work?
Right. So for me, I always, in any conversation, in any, even in an argument, I always think, okay, what is the end goal here?
Hmm.
So, I always try to start with the end in mind. And
Hmm.
if it's, let's say I'm having a disagreement with somebody, like a really strong disagreement, my first inkling is, where do I want this relationship to end up?
Right.
Like, how important is this relationship? So that helps me gauge how far into this conversation I'm going to go.
Right.
That's the first thing. And then, like, how I'm going to navigate the conversation. So, if somebody, because I have similar triggers,
Hmm.
right? It not even so much for me, like walking in the building, I think is okay, but attending, a rite of passage, a baptism, or you know, 12 years old and receiving the priesthood, something like that.
Right.
For me, that is triggering, and so it would, first of all, it would have to be somebody who was super important and dear to me,
Willing to deal with the trauma for,
willing to
yeah.
deal with the trauma for the sake of that relationship.
Right.
And then and then it's a lot of preparation beforehand because I'm going
Right.
to have to prepare myself to go through and to try. I have often said there are some things that almost hurt my ears to
Mhm.
because they are so not in line with what I believe.
Right.
And so I've only been in the situation one time where I've been since I left,
Mhm.
and because the relationship was so important for me. But in coming out of that ordinance or whatever, coming out of that um, day, I had to go to a friend who understood where I was, who had been where I'd been, and have a lot of conversation because the
Right.
triggers were hard.
Right.
And I think that, but on the other side of that, the person who asked me to attend understood that I was in a very vulnerable spot in doing
Right.
that and was very loving and respectful that I would come.
Right.
And so, you know, and that isn't the way it's going to be all the time.
No, sometimes it's just expected. I know several people where it's just expected. Um,
And
and
there's
people don't
no
understand that it could
that
be
it's like
triggering,
what's the big
or
deal?
yeah, that it could be a big deal. And I know that that's harder. And I know a lot of people that deal with that. Like, get your stuff together and just come.
Right.
You did this your whole life. Just do it. Do it one more time for me.
Right. It's it's your friend's kid or a niece or a nephew or whatever
Yeah.
the situation is. So you're just supposed to go.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I feel, like I said, I feel super um, lucky, thankful, blessed, whatever, that we had the empathy working both ways
Hmm.
in that situation. We never really talked about it.
Hmm.
And I sort of went on my end and dealt with it.
Hmm.
And I don't know that, I don't know there was anything for her to deal with because
It wasn't triggering
it
for
wasn't
her.
triggering for her. It was
No.
triggering for me. But
Right.
my love for her and her family outweighed for me that day. But the after effect of that was weeks and almost months
I bet.
to kind of get a grasp. And so I've kind of said to myself, and for me, there just aren't that many at that level intimate relationships
Hmm.
for me left that are still connected to the church. I don't know for anyone else I would have done that.
Right.
And I don't know, I often think, I my children are young adults. So we're through the kid in the school stage. And the next envelope is the one day there's going to be weddings, and
Yeah.
what will I do in that situation?
Yeah.
I'm already thinking of that, and it could be soon, it could be a number of years away, but I think about it like almost in a preparatory way.
Yeah. It's like there in the back of your mind. You're starting to kind of scenario plan, I guess.
Yeah. But what do you do in a situation where it is just an expectation? I mean, and
Hmm. I think boundaries comes into play there. To be really honest, um, just because somebody expects something doesn't mean you have to do it. So that I think is really difficult sometimes for people who are members of the church or have been in the past, because there is so much that you're called to do, or I call it voluntold to do,
right,
right? Clean the church building on Saturday morning, go to the temple, drive people, bake cookies for
big
the scout
meals.
thing, um, hold your calling, do your visiting teaching, which is now ministering. Um, so all of those different things, you're so used to being told, I expect you to do this, and you just
You
fall into
just do
line,
it.
that I think it can be really difficult, both for the people that are still in the church to accept that someone could say, no, that doesn't fall in line with what I want to do or what's good for me, as well as hard for people who have left to say, to really consider, is this healthy for me? Is this something I can do? Because sometimes people can't. Like,
Right,
we'll have a full blown panic attack,
right,
walking into a church building, or um, I mean, the organ music pipes up and just panic attack. Like, it
right.
just brings up so much trauma. And I think it really depends on your upbringing, the trauma you experience there, um, the level of anxiety that you feel. So I think if you can't have the conversation,
Right.
if there isn't that empathy where you can, say, hey, so I'm a little worried about this. Like, I experienced trauma going into LDS events, into LDS churches. The lingo can trigger me sometimes. I'm a little worried about, what might be said and how I might feel. Um, even just feeling welcome.
Right.
Um, so if you can't talk about that, and if they can't talk about, what they're really hoping to gain from it,
Right.
um, then I think that's where, I mean, boundaries always need to be in place, but that's where you have the boundaries and you may disappoint people.
Right.
Being authentic to yourself,
Sometimes
I
means.
think always means someone's going to be disappointed. I don't think there's a way you can be authentic without disappointing someone at some point. So, having the boundary of, I mean, of, I know this is important to you and you're important to me, but
My
this is as
health.
much as I can do. And I can't go any further than that without it being unhealthy for me.
Yeah.
So I think that's really where boundaries come into play, especially, I mean, always with or without empathy, but especially when there is no empathy, you have to set the boundaries of this is what I can and can't do, um, and be okay with the fact that
Where
people,
the chips may fall.
yes, that,
Because the reaction to that may be
yeah,
not welcoming, not understanding, not
yeah,
kind.
shaming.
Right.
It may
Right.
be shaming.
It may be shaming. It may be anger coming at you
Hmm.
from the other side
Hmm.
when you state what your boundary is,
Yeah,
and that can be traumatic too.
yeah.
And
And it can add trauma to the trauma that you already have.
can.
Um, can I just say really quick, if you're in that situation, if you're in a place where, I mean, you are experiencing this on a regular basis where you have people that are not willing to back and forth with you to do that, to do empathy, to allow you to set boundaries, and if they're lashing out at you, please get a therapist if you don't have one. I mean,
Absolutely.
somebody that you can like bounce these things off of, that isn't going to be triggered by what you say, that can help you work through those feelings. Super, super healthy to have a professional help you work through these things, because some of them are family patterns
Right.
that go back for ages, and they're exacerbated by culture and expectation. And I mean, it's hard to break those things on your own sometimes because it's all you've ever known.
It is, and
So,
and going to somebody, especially someone who's trained in
mhm,
that field, gives you a safe place to say what you really really need to say.
right,
Just whatever that is in your heart is because you're not going to hurt them.
right.
Right, you're not going to
They're not
offend them.
attached.
They're not attached. They have no skin in the game personally, and so you can be free to sort through and to investigate what it is you're feeling
Yeah,
in a safe place.
super helpful for me. I mean, I started therapy about the time I met you. Like 2009 is when I started therapy. So about a year after we met. And I just remember how freeing it was to sit down and just be like, this is how I actually feel without worrying about.
Hmm.
I was clinically depressed at the time. And I was able to say exactly how I felt without worrying about my husband feeling like somehow he had failed me, or my mother feeling like somehow she had failed me, or and just being able to say exactly what I felt, exactly what was going on for me. um
In a time that's just for you.
yes, where I didn't have to take care of anyone
Right.
else. It was just about what's going on for me, and it was really such a healthy step. And even after I stopped therapy, like the things I learned there continued to benefit me as I began to open up and kind of sort through some of my own things. So
Agreed.
yeah, it
Absolutely.
was like the key I needed to kind of unlock the
Right.
ability to sort through things.
Because when you're trying to sort through them in a vacuum,
Yeah,
you just continue to spiral in the same place. I mean, it's like spinning. It's like walking on
yeah,
a treadmill. You're not going anywhere, and it just
yeah. And you just have the tiny toolbox you've used the whole
right.
time. It's almost like you take it and you give it to someone. You're like, "Here's my tools," and they're like,
Here's all four of them.
you have a Phillips screwdriver and a saw, and yeah, and they're like, here's a hammer and a few other things. How about we try that? Like, this is a hammer job, okay?
Right.
So
Exactly.
you're trying to whack it with a screwdriver. That's not doing anything. So
Exactly.
yeah. So really, 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 if if regardless, honestly, if you're going through a faith transition, I almost recommend a therapist across the board.
Absolutely.
But for some people, it's not as traumatic as for others. So
Well, like you were raised. I mean, that was everything foundationally for
my
you.
entire world,
Right. And
yeah,
for me, I spent 15, 18 years in it. And though those were formative adult years, I had a perspective of what life was like before.
right,
And so for me, some of the things that are triggering and traumatic for you, and
hmm
just like for anybody, everyone has different experiences. The same thing is not as traumatic for me
right,
or traumatic at all in some
right,
instances for me. Whereas other things, for me are more of a sticking point
hmm
than they are for you, or you haven't uh, delved into that part yet, or
right,
whatever.
right,
So yeah, different things are going to be totally experienced differently, and a
absolutely.
therapist really helps sort through those things so
Yes.
much.
And if you've had a bad experience with a therapist, I often get that too. People are like, I tried
I
that
don't get
once.
that.
Okay, so therapists, like, yeah, there's again as many like different
Yep.
personalities of therapists as
Shopping for therapists is awesome.
so important.
It's so important.
You may go to one and your personalities just don't click. Go to another one. It's
Right.
okay. It's not like if
Absolutely.
you've tried them one, you've tried them all. I promise. Every therapist is a different
Very different.
therapist. So, yeah, even if they use the same kind of therapy, they're different therapists. So,
Yep, they have different backgrounds, different study, areas of
right.
study, and different life experiences for themselves. Just where how they, um, you know, have implemented things in their work that has worked for other people similarly situated. Someone may have more experience with faith transition
Right.
than someone else does,
Right.
and so you might have to shop a little bit to get to that right person. But
Absolutely.
it's so worth it.
So worth it.
So
Yeah,
worth it. Yeah.
totally agree.
But
Well,
like what we were talking about a little bit earlier was that I just wanted to kind of revisit or touch on is that when you're when you're for instance in my friendship and
mhm.
in the friendship that I hold really dear, it had in the beginning when I was so angry, and I'll tell you that I'm sure that there was a lot of fear on for her part is what this meant for our relationship.
Yeah.
And there was fear on my part too. What is this going to mean for our relationship? Had we kind of stopped at that point and just not like, like I said, I always try to start with the end in mind.
Right.
And the end for that relationship is I love that person like my sister.
Right.
And so it is worth for me to give and, do the give and take. And throughout the years, it's changed what the give and take has looked like to try to get to a really healthy place in our
hmm
in our relationship. And so um had I just given, thrown in the towel and been like, well, now we're on different sides and this is never going to work.
Right.
Oh my goodness, what I would have missed in my journey, in our journey together, in our
hmm
friendship, because it has changed, it has evolved. It is and some days it's harder than others,
Yes.
right? Some
Yeah.
days it's very much, I still, even, and now we're talking 3 years down the
hmm
road, there's still days where it's certainly, I feel, and this isn't because of necessarily anything that she's doing, but I still have
hmm
eggshell days.
hmm
And then there's other days where we're a little bit more, brave
hmm
about saying, like today, for instance, I'm visiting. I'm visiting here in town. I moved out of state a couple of years ago. I'm visiting in town, and I went to my former home church this morning, and she went to her church, and we met back up in the early afternoon. And I was able to say, how was church? She
hmm
said it was great. How was church for you? It was great. Just getting to the point where that isn't threatening.
Where that doesn't feel like the end of the world to say,
We
how
went
was
to a
church? And
different
you guys went to
church,
different churches. Yeah.
right? And clear, and 2 years ago that we couldn't. I was
hmm
afraid that I would hurt her feelings
Right.
by saying, oh, I went to church today and I heard this really great thing, that I would literally hurt her feelings.
Right.
And so, but my love for her, and I will say this, that it's never, we have been very fortunate in that we were never butting heads in
Right.
the relationship. Like we both have enough, we both respect each other so much that even when I was in my anger phase, I never like lashed at her.
Right.
And so I'm thankful for that because we haven't had to come back from that.
Right.
And in some situations, in some relationships, you do. I
Yeah.
mean, and so
And it's not impossible.
it's not impossible to overcome even that
Yeah.
because whether it's faith transition or not, sometimes we just say stupid things. We just say, or angry things or
Mhm.
hurtful things. And, that's in any relationship.
Yeah.
So fortunately for this, relationship, I haven't had to come back from that, but I've had to work through other things like the fear of saying the wrong thing,
Mhm.
the fear of saying the honest, authentic thing.
Mhm.
And just little by little, sticking with it and loving each other where we're at has allowed us to get to a place where we're safer with each
Right.
other.
Right.
And though I don't necessarily have the same level of conversation about my faith transition that I have with you,
Mhm.
who, can totally, assimilate what I'm talking about
Mhm.
because you've had a similar experience. She and I are getting to a point now where we're, safe enough to have a spiritual conversation,
Right. Without
just
it
without it being
meaning a lot more than it means.
than
Yeah.
whatever it means. And that has just been a beautiful place to wind up. So,
Right.
it can be done. It can be done if you're both vested in this in a mutual outcome.
Absolutely. And
And
I love that you said you have to both be there.
you do.
It's just like a marriage. I mean, if one person is all about making the marriage work and the other person is not, you can't make the marriage work.
You can.
But if both of you are like
Equally
willing to
vested.
slog through the messy swamp of
Right.
a faith transition, you can absolutely make it work. Will you say the wrong thing sometimes? For
Totally.
sure.
Totally.
Will you breach trust sometimes? For sure. Will you feel unsafe, have the eggshell moments like you talked about? Absolutely.
Absolutely.
But if you're both willing to like work on it, willing to be authentic, talk about your feelings, and if the other person's willing to listen and validate that, like,
And you have to also know when to pull back.
yes,
Because sometimes you will be in a place where you're dug into what you believe and they're dug into what they believe, and you just can't have that conversation that moment.
yes,
And you know what? That's going to have to be one of those boundaries for both of you,
mhm.
that it's okay to put up the white flag for a minute and be like, you know what? We're not gonna do this today. We're gonna go ahead
Some
and
other time.
let's just go get ice cream
Yes.
because we can't do this.
Yeah.
And that's okay because it's a journey.
Yeah.
As long as what is at the core of the journey is love for one another and some respect for one another, so on equal basis.
Hmm.
It's okay to call uncle sometimes and
Yeah.
just take a step back and just remember what's important is our friendship, our family ship, whatever that is, and mutually agree to disagree and just move on.
Absolutely. I love that. Well, and I love too, it gives you that time and that space to really like cool down,
Yeah.
think about like, because sometimes I find I get worked up when I'm afraid I don't know what to say next, or like,
Or you're not being heard.
or I'm not being heard.
Right.
And so sometimes just taking that time to like really get to the root of what am I feeling? What do I hope is the outcome?
Right.
Like, what do I need here? Um, really is helpful
Yeah, I
to be
agree.
able to come back
To
and
navigate.
communicate that with the person. So, yeah, fantastic. There's so much more we could talk about. You and I could talk for hours, and we did a couple of weeks ago when I went out to visit her.
Yeah.
So, yeah, could talk for hours. We're not going to put you guys through that. Thank you so much for listening with us and listening to our conversation. And this is a work in progress. Like,
Totally.
I feel like every year I learn a little bit more, and yeah, I mean, I look at myself even a year ago, I thought I was pretty reasonable a year ago, and still, like, I've grown a lot in that year, and still make lots of mistakes, and still definitely get triggered, and
Yes.
like, there's all of that, like, that process. It's not like you get through it and you're done, like, it's kind of cyclical, and
It is.
yeah,
Yeah. I
but
agree.
yeah, all about the empathy and
Yeah.
just caring about each other.
Right.
So,
Yep.
well, thank you, friend. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
coming, and yeah, I think you guys will be hearing more from her in the future. She's got some big things coming up, and so excited that she's my friend and that I've gotten a chance to learn from her. So thanks, She.
Thank you.